In this presentation, we're going to go over how you can write an abstract based on your own research, whether it's a paper for a class or something you've pursued for another interest, and how you can submit it for a conference or possible publication in a written volume. This is a kind of a broad presentation, so not all of it will apply to every student, and you may want to skip from slide to slide. But I'd recommend that the first time you watch the whole presentation so that you see where the most important ideas are for the topic you're working on. In English studies, whether it's for rhetoric and composition, pedagogy, or literary study, people ask for abstracts for a couple of reasons. Professors will ask for them so that they can see that you understand the full context of what you've worked on. A conference will ask for abstracts so that they can see whether or not your work fits with the ideas they have for their conference, and more importantly, if they like your ideas, how they can fit them together with other people's ideas and make coherent sessions or even themes to weave through a conference program. And editors of journals and anthologies use abstracts to look for interesting papers that will flesh out and give the dimension to the particular volume they're trying to put together. So when they're looking for an abstract, they're looking for a little document that will give them a quick overview of your work, that will let them see what you think is important in the work, that will contextualize what you're doing, and allow them to see how it might fit with other papers they're considering. Now that's a lot of work to be done in 250 to 300 words, which is the usual length for an abstract in literary studies. So that's why it's important to really put some thought into these. And that leads to the vexed question of when you write your abstract. Some people like to write their abstract first because it gives them a little snapshot of what they want their paper to be, and it allows them to stay on focus when they're developing their papers. Other writers will do their abstract after they've finished, or almost at the end of their process, to kind of tighten it up and make sure it's focused they want it to be, and to make sure that they can describe how the paper turned out instead of how they intended for it to turn out. And a lot of people write abstracts later than when they have done the paper because they'll see a call for papers come out for a scholarly conference or for publication and go like, that paper I wrote a couple of years ago or a couple of months ago, that might fit if I did some work to it. And so they might write their abstract considerably later. There's no hard and fast rule as to when you should write your abstract. Whatever works for you is when you should write it. So we're going to look at the process of writing an abstract, both in trying to figure out how to design it and what to put in it. And we're going to use as a model a paper that many of you have seen in either English 219 or English 300 or English 600, Dr. Leslie Bickford's wonderful little model, The Little Mermaid's Pact with Satan. And we're going to assume that you have completed the paper, The Little Mermaid's Pact with Satan, and you're now going to write an abstract about it. Now, at this point, if you're just writing an abstract for a paper in a class and you're not thinking about going to a conference or submitting it to a journal, the next couple of slides may seem a little bit off topic to you, but there's going to be some good hints in there that will help you write a better abstract for your class. So again, I want to make sure that, at least on your first viewing of this video, that you go all the way through and watch all the slides. Hang in there. This is important. The first thing comes, of course, is where do you find a place to submit an abstract to? Now, sometimes in your classes, if a professor likes your work, the professor will suggest to you, you might submit this paper to CEA, or to SPAR, or to the Source Conference, or to NCUR, or to the 4Cs, or NCTE, or whatever. And if a professor tells you a place to go look, well, that saves you a lot of the work. But for the rest of us, when we're looking for a paper in literary studies, we go off to a website maintained by the English department at the University of Pennsylvania called the Penn Call for Papers website. And it's not a very fancy website, as you can see here. When you link to it, you just get a thing that says, here's how you can submit a paper to it. And then down the left-hand side, you'll see a list of links going down here. And this is what you want to look for if you're trying to find a link. Find a topic in here that would suggest the kind of work you're doing. You might be, African American lit, American lit, classical studies, eco-criticism, and then they're usually alphabetical, but just slide down and there's probably about 50 or 60 subcategories on this website that you can slide down through and try to find call for paper. So let's go look for something for the Little Mermaid's Pact with Satan.
There are some other very good guides to calls for papers, including Humanities Net's Call for Papers announcements page, which lists things in many versions of the humanities, not just literary studies. And there's another one called the CFP list, which is an offshoot of Humanities Net's that lists mostly programs in English studies, but it will be a little bit broader because it brings in things like theater, drama, linguistics, and stuff like that. But for the purpose of this video, we're going to use the Penn Call for Papers website. And we're going to look under the subheading Gender Studies and Sexuality, because that sounds like a good place to put a conference call for papers for the Little Mermaid's Pact with Satan.
There's a category called Gender Studies, and in that Gender Studies listing, you find this call for paper, Materializing Absence in Film and Media. And you go, that might be interesting. And you see what it is something having to do with the website screeningthepast.com. That's a journal, a peer-reviewed scholarly journal that exists online for film criticism involving gender studies. And you're going, okay, I've got Little Mermaid. I'm talking about her role as a woman. There's gender studies, and it's a film. So this looks like a pretty good one. So you click on the link, and what you find is this description: Materializing Absence in Film and Media. Over the past decade, and now you start looking for words that will be tip-off to things that the editors are looking for. So they're looking for things about ideas of presence, the body, cinema, senses, haunted imagery, fascination with the past, appeals to time and memory, the elusive properties of film, things like that, the role of the imagination, and you're going, a lot of those things sound like things that came up in my paper. Let's look for some more details. As you're reading, you want to go through and you want to look for keywords that might be useful. So you get absence, and you get emotions, and you get how is it figured or represented in various cinema contexts. How does it conflict with issues of personal and cultural memories, long-standing concepts, all right? And you start looking for what the editors are looking for. They're interested in theorizing. They're interested in ways and aesthetics. While no one methodological approach will be favored, we ask that the authors address the interrelationships between absence, embodiment, and presence. All right. And they give you some suggested topics down here. And I've only kind of copied part of the list here because it's a long list. But things like subjectivity, imagination, themes, you start making yourself a list of keywords. The reason you do this is, first of all, because you want to know what to highlight in your paper. And secondly, because repeating some of those keywords in your abstract will make it more possible for your abstract to be accepted. You also want to look at the deadlines for this. First of all, this one is a very thorough because it tells you who is editing the issue, and you can go ahead and look their work up and see what kind of things those particular people do scholarship in and see how your work would fit with them, because the more it looks like their work, the more they're likely to like it. You're told you can have an abstract of up to 300 words. That abstract can have 3 to 5 references in it, so 3 to 5 citations, and a short biography of the author. And you've got a deadline of when you have to turn this in, December 20th, and you're told where to send it. And you're also told what will happen. On the basis of the selected abstracts, you'll be invited to submit a full manuscript for double-blind peer review. So that means just because your abstract is accepted doesn't mean your article will be accepted, but it also means that this is going to be a very carefully edited issue, and so it will have a lot of scholarly respectability. So this is a really good connection to shoot for. All right, So now we have our keywords, we know our important dates, we know our deadlines. What do we do next? Let's look at the next slide. The abstract you're going to make now has 5 steps to it. It can be inflated or shrunk down depending on how long the abstract needs to be, but this is a method that will give you an abstract that meets most editors and most conference organizers and most professors' requirements. And so it's one that you can refine on for the particular situation that you're in. The most important sentence in any abstract is the first one, because that's the hook. That's the one that would keep a conference organizer or a journal editor reading, and it's also the one that if they publish the abstracts in the conference program, that most people who go to the conference are going to look at to see if they want to go hear your paper. So it should have something intriguing in it. It should have something interesting or challenging. It shouldn't be a very basic sentence that everybody could write, like many critics have written about the passivity of the heroines in Disney movies. Okay, nobody's going to challenge that. That's a simple fact. It doesn't really interest anybody, does it? But if you say, Disney cinematic heroines face a haunting dilemma. They can either remain silent, invisible good girls, or speak out and pay a terrible price. Now that's interesting because you're painting something that people think they know about, which is Disney heroines like Cinderella and Snow White and Belle and Ariel. And it's like, okay, that's putting it in an interesting way that I'm not used to. Also, for those of you who are noticing, there are words picked up here like haunting and invisible and cinematic that are in the call for papers. So there in your first sentence, in your first about 20-25 words, you've got 3 of the keywords to remind the organizers that yes, you're targeting this paper at exactly what they're looking for. So that's a great strategy to start with. Next comes your argument sentence. Now, amateurs will probably cut and paste the thesis from the first paragraph of their paper in here. And you can do that, but that's not as interesting as making it more of a guideline sentence. So instead of copying your exact thesis sentence, for example, with the Little Mermaid's Pact with Satan, you might say, in this paper, I argue that the little princess, Ariel, must sacrifice her own emotions and voice in order to achieve her goals. And notice again, we've picked up some keywords. Sacrifice, emotions, all right, voice, embodiment, whatever. And so you've picked up ideas that are in that call for papers again, and you've also given people a sense of this is what you're going to argue without giving away your actual thesis. So you still got them hooked. You've still got them reading. Now you build on that hook by adding several sentences describing how you make the argument. And again, you want to use your keywords in these things. And again, people who aren't very good at this will sometimes copy the topic sentences out of some of the body paragraphs of their paper. And that's maybe an okay way to start a draft, but you should refine on it. So notice what the writer of this paper did. She said, I take issue with the arguments. So she's telling us that, okay, she is going to be it's going to be a persuasive article. 3 feminist critics. Remember they said they wanted to know what particular critical school you were from and who've studied things like that. And she focuses specifically on the argument that Ariel's sacrifice links her with the cultural archetype. Oh, that was in that call for papers, the cultural models. However, I argue her pact is modeled more on Milton's Satan. Ooh, that's unusual. I don't know how many people have connected Disney's women with Milton. And her silencing is by her own choice, showing she retains her agency. I conclude that she's actually a fraud since she wins Eric by her looks alone. And this message ties into Disney's skewed cultural distory. All right, that's a term in cultural studies for Disney's manipulation of history. And she's picking up again all of those ideas out of the call for papers. And the conclusion, it consistently attempts to erase women's voices. All right, plays into that whole notion of invisibility and embodiment again. So notice here we don't really actually have specific quotes from the paper. What we have is a description of how the paper makes the argument. Taking issue with critics, particularly focusing on Margaret Starbird, bringing up instead a different cultural archetype, and making a conclusion that's not a very popular one, since a lot of people like The Little Mermaid, but she's concluding that Ariel is actually a fraud. So that's going to be a very interesting paper to people. Now, this abstract is starting to come together. Now we have a picture of what it's going to do. We have a sense of, ooh, that's interesting. And you have about 200 words at this point, and you're looking for a 300-word abstract. So now you can go back to step 2, your purpose sentence, and step 3 in these detail sentences, and you can flesh them out just a little more. You don't have to give them much, but you can really get it pulled together. And then you're going to take a final step that really has a lot of influence on conference organizers and paper editors. Now, you would not add this sentence if you were just turning an abstract in for a paper in your class. But if you are sending an abstract off to a conference or off to an editor, they like to know that the work is complete, and they also want to know as well, if I'm going to do this paper, does she need anything special? Like she's talking about a movie. Does she need a projector? Does she need a laptop and projection equipment and a screen? What does the submitter need to give this paper? And if you add a sentence to the end of an abstract, and this is often beyond the 300 words, but I've never known an editor who particularly cared about something like this. If you add a sentence or two at the end that says, my paper is complete and can be delivered in 20 minutes, or my completed essay with notes runs approximately 5,800 words, that tells the editors that you know what you're doing, you understand what they are doing, and that gives them a sense that even though they may not know you, and they may not know that you're an undergrad or a grad student, that they know that you are a polished person about giving papers because you've known to give them this information. So psychologically, you're creating an impression at the end of your abstract that, hey, you're good at this, you're one of the pros, you should be invited to the conference. Now you'll notice that I put a little asterisk after finished. Yeah, because sometimes you write the abstract and the paper's not done yet. And as far as you go on, you start sometimes to write abstracts for things you haven't yet written that you think you might like to write. So sometimes that finished may only be complete in your head. But you don't need to tell the editors that. Don't say, my paper is in rough draft, or I will turn my paper in by December. Don't tell them it's not done, because if you tell them it's not done, that gives them an incentive not to take it. So you always want to tell them it's finished, even if it's only finished in your head. And again, tell them what audiovisual equipment or anything else you might need to present it. So for example, if you're going to do something on Prezi, do you need the internet? If you're going to be showing PowerPoints, do you need to be able to access PowerPoint? So a sentence like, I'll bring video clips on a portable drive, but we'll need a computer projector and access to show all my materials. Things like that really, really help the conference organizer. Sometimes there is a line on the conference submission sheet where you put that in, but it's also always good to double it up in the abstracts because those conference submission sheets and the abstracts often get separated when people are putting the conference together so that your abstract can be read anonymously. So there's no favoritism given to people with recognizable names or at specific institutions. And so it's always good just to make sure that your AV requirements stay with your abstract. There is nothing worse than going off to a conference with a beautiful PowerPoint embedded with video clips that you're intending to show and find out that you've been scheduled for a room that doesn't have a computer or a projector or a screen because you either have to, fake your paper or do your paper without the video support, or at the last moments the conference organizers have to flail to find you stuff. And either way, somebody's going to be very unhappy. So that's why you always add that sentence. The very final step is to look at your title. And titles are something that often at conferences can be funny or jokey, but they are also meant to do this for a reason. When a conference organizer is trying to put together papers and trying to put together sessions, they want things that will be appealing to the people who've paid money to come to the conference. After all, at some point or another, they're going to have to put together papers that, are going to be given at an 8:30 in the morning session, or late in the afternoon on Saturday, or on Sunday morning when everybody's getting ready to leave. And so it helps if your paper title is something that might draw a casually interested attendee to want to come to your session. I mean, think of it. Would you rather go to a paper called Issues of Heteronormativity and Gender Performance in Twain's Novels at 8 in the morning, or a paper entitled Come Back to the Raft, Huck Honey? Right. I know at 8 o'clock in the morning, if I'm trying to make myself go to a paper, the second title is a lot more interesting to me than the first one. Now, what you might do, especially if you want to use one of those fun titles, is to use what the Professor Dorothy Hill used to call post-colonic surge, which is to say you put your fun title in the first part of your title, and then you use a colon, and after the colon, you come up with a little bit more of an academic description. So something here might be not just The Little Mermaid's Pact with Satan, but The Little Mermaid's Pact with Satan, Gender and Abstinence in Disney's Representation of History, or something like that, because that would give you the post-colonic description of what you're doing, as well as that wonderful pre-colonic title, The Little Mermaid's Pact with Satan, to attract people to the paper. Finally, check every detail. Make sure you've met the length requirements. If it says they want 300 words, for instance, make sure that you are somewhere between 275 and 310. That doesn't include your sentence about AV materials, but everything else should be within the requirements that the editor set, because that's the kind of information they need. Make sure it is perfectly edited, perfectly documented. You haven't used a wrong form of a word. You haven't put in effect for affect or lose for loose. You haven't left out a punctuation mark. Show them that you are a careful and conscientious and thorough scholar, the kind of person they want to work with. And finally, make sure it's submitted on time. You can't ask for an extension, usually. Sometimes editors will extend a deadline for a call for papers, but not often. And usually they're backed up against another deadline of their own, so they're trying to make some kind of connection, and they need your work by a certain date in order to do that. So you want to try to turn things in on time, even a little bit before the deadline if you can, because that way, in case there's some great internet disaster or some, the FedEx doesn't deliver, or because there's a snowstorm, or, the entire internet goes down, or things like that, that you can still get through. Now, if you follow these 5 steps to creating an abstract, you'll have a very good chance of having your work accepted. I can't guarantee that your work will be accepted. That depends on the quality of the work and the way you write the abstract. But these 5 steps will allow you to put together an abstract that serves the needs of conference organizers and editors, that shows your professors that you have your act together, that you know what you're doing in your paper, and it will give you a better chance of success. And that's what the Snappy Guides are all about. Good luck, and we hope your paper gets accepted.